Hi guys, this is a video that I've been wanting to do for a while, since I got back from the Mara in fact. This season I took up an 800mm fixed lens from Canon, an 800 F5.6, which is a fantastic piece of glass, lighter than the 600 and obviously gives you a little bit more reach when you're out in the field. And so I'm used to shooting with these longer focal lengths, but a lot of people aren't, and a lot of people rent these kind of lenses but don't necessarily know how to use them, and they may know that they've got the extra focal length, but there are a couple of things that you need to start thinking about when you are shooting with these kind of focal lengths and these prime lenses. The first one, I'm going to look through a couple of images, but the first thing that you've got to remember here is that your composition with a fixed lens at 800mm, there's not much room for play when it comes to composing your image. So you've got to start to look for interesting and different compositions. You've also got to be very aware about where your focus points are because of this focal length, and we'll come to that shortly. But here's an example of an image which I fluffed completely by cropping off the feet of this line. Based at 800mm, using the top right focus point, I was so focused on the head and the face that I'd actually forgotten about the bottom half of the subject and clipped his feet there. So that's one of the things. On a composition side of things, you do then have to start to look for interesting and unique ways of telling the story. This is again full frame. Elephant was very, very close. Could have gone to a 70 to 200 to get the shot, but what I was looking to do is challenge myself a little bit more by using this longer focal length. Again, composition, leading lines running through the image, and again, being very aware of the depth of field that results from using these longer lenses. Another example of having to use interesting and different compositions, I shared this on my Facebook page this last week. I quite like it. There's a sort of mirroring going on here, but it took me a while just scanning through this massive herd of buffalo with the 800mm lens on the 5D3, trying to work out and find an interesting and compelling composition. So that's the first thing that you need to be aware of, composition. The second is heat haze, and no, this wasn't taken in the Masai Mara, but on the South Rift Valley. And you can very clearly see that the image here is not sharp. This was taken off a 600mm mid-morning. It was getting hot. This is a Masai warrior walking along the lake bed of Lake Natron. And you can see that the convection waves there distort the way that the light is entering through the lens and how it actually renders when you take the image. You end up getting a very soft image. It's something to be aware of because it's not always a desirable kind of effect in an image. But if we have a look at this example from the Mara, a lot of heat haze in the background there, very clearly and very, very obvious. Even the subject closest to us, you can see it's not quite sharp. And that's not because of focus or the shutter speed or anything like that, but purely because of the heat haze and the convection currents that are at play here, meaning that you don't get those sharp shots. There's not much that you can do about it apart from getting a lot closer to your subject. As you can see here, the cheetah's much sharper and far more in focus than the wildebeest. But how to use this to your benefit, this certainly tells a story. It's hot. The cheetah is panting, wildebeest moving out in the background, they're blurred. It's incredibly hot. And as a cheetah hunts in the middle of the day, kind of works in terms of telling and conveying a sense of the animal's story and nature. So those are two examples of heat haze. The next one is depth of field, and everyone grabs these lenses like a 300 2.8 even, or a 400 2.8, 600 f4, and they open wide up. And that's great, but you've got a very, very shallow depth of field. And I'm going to post a link to a blog that I wrote earlier about what you have to be aware of in terms of depth of field when shooting with prime lenses like this and longer focal lengths. So you need to be very, very aware of where you place your focus point. This lilac Restarola was sitting maybe, I think, 3-4 meters from us on the edge of the vehicle, so this is full frame as well. And looks like a great shot at this kind of resolution, but if we zoom in up to 100%, have a look here. Just from the shoulder, this is the nice sharp part over here, but the eye is soft. So that's a matter of centimeters in terms of your resultant depth of field when you're shooting with an 800mm lens. So bring it back and go into the next frame, change your focus point, get it bang on the eye, and there you've got the detail. So it literally is just about where you're placing your focus point. So you need to be very, very aware of where you place that to make sure that you're conveying the right sense of story or the right story there. The other way to have done this, if you wanted the whole bird nice and sharp, would be to open up to f8, f9, f10, or whatever the case is. And that's often what people forget about on these lenses. They sit with it wide open because they want this beautiful, soft, blurred background. but your depth of field is so shallow that you may not actually render your subject correctly if you're going to be shooting like that all the time. Talking about this beautiful background and soft blurred foregrounds, just a couple of images of Topi, for example, which using a shallow depth of field, focusing on a certain part of the image and using the shallow depth of field that you get from these 800mm lenses to tell a different story. I quite like the symmetry in this one. Again, very close, nice soft blurred background. I think this was taken at about f8 because we were very close and because I wanted to make sure that even though my focus point was on the eye of this rosy-throated longclaw, that all of the subject was sharp and in focus. So you can see here that everything right through to the base and to these beautiful little purple flowers in the foreground is nice and sharp. Perhaps including a little bit more detail in the background than I would have liked, but I'd rather have my subject really, really nice and sharp throughout. And just a final example of getting down nice and low, including the foreground, which I'll include a link here to blurring the foreground, which was our Be Inspired By theme last week, can really add in terms of natural framing to an image. So there are a couple of thoughts on me shooting with the 800 out in the Mara. Got some great images, looking forward to sharing more of them with you guys. But if you have any questions about shooting with primes and longer glass like 600s and 800s, drop a line on the bottom of this post, leave a comment, and we can get in touch with you and give you some answers. Cheers.